apart. If they're too fashionable, if they're not fashionable enough, if they're a little bit dowdy, if it's not smart, if there's any kind of wardrobe malfunction, something doesn't sit right, the press pick up on it and they get picked to pieces.
Hello, my name is Kate Mancy and I'm Assistant Editor and Royal Editor at The Times. Today on Royal Confidential, we're joined by author Jane Eastoe to discuss The Times' new book, British Royal Fashion. So, welcome, Jane. It's really nice to meet you.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you too, Kate.
And this is a fantastic book, isn't it? Because it's not just a kind of coffee table book taking us through all the kind of glorious pictures. It's the kind of stories that appeared in the Times and Sunday Times throughout the years, and the stories of royal fashion through right back to sort of Queen Victoria's day. Can you tell us the sort of the thesis for the book, why you wanted to work on this project?
I think for me it was particularly interesting, and I have a background in fashion and fashion journalism. And so I can look at the work that I did more years ago than I care to remember. And I can see the development across the decades. And I think this project allowed us to do what is not done very often, which is to try and look at a subject in the contemporary terms of the day they were writing. And that gave us quite an interesting new perspective. And it also highlighted quite a lot of changes in attitude to royal dress, which have come, across the centuries.
We see a lot about Princess Margaret. I mean, right from the start of the book, we see Princess Margaret and how she became a fashion icon.
Mm-hmm.
How did she manage to develop her interest in fashion while not upstaging her sister, the Queen? Because that's quite a tightrope to walk, isn't it?
It's a very difficult one to walk, and I think essentially she had a little bit more freedom. She did not have the position that Queen Elizabeth had to maintain. She could afford to show a little décolletage. She could afford to be a little bit racier with her hem lengths, and to be a little bit freer. But actually, in the book there is an interview with her that was conducted, I can't remember what date it was now, I think it was the 80s, and she emphasizes all the key royal attributes about dress, which is, as far as she is concerned, it is her work clothes. Mm-hmm. And she acknowledged that her work clothes were rather better than most people's work clothes. And because she had to look rather better. The interview doesn't altogether present her in the best light.
Those are the days, weren't they, of royal interviews where they actually said what they were thinking.
Indeed. But she just had that little bit more freedom, I think. And she was exceptionally beautiful. I mean, Queen Elizabeth was very beautiful when she was young. But Princess Margaret was really stunning.
And you say she had that freedom to dress a bit, in a slightly more racy way. But it struck me that it was perhaps their personalities as well. That's what we were always sort of led to believe, that the Queen was a bit more buttoned up.
I think she could afford to be a little bit more experimental, and you particularly notice it with things like the hats. I mean, there's some great 1960s hats, and the Queen didn't dare to wear anything that was quite that forward thinking. And there's a wonderful picture of her with Lord Snowdon, the pair of them in some kind of checked 1960s headwear with almost ear flaps and these extraordinary wraparound sunglasses, and they look like something out of a style film from the 1960s.
Well, he was famous for his sunglasses, wasn't he? And his son then sort of followed suit. I think even lending the current king sunglasses. They were very trendy. They were the kind of trendsetters of their time, weren't they?
They were. I mean, he was, I think, he was very dominant, and unlike with most brides, he very much had a hand in what she wore on her wedding day. And
well, that's really interesting that you come onto that, because the influence of the bridal gowns, because some of those kind of peak royal fashion moments are those kind of bridal gowns. So you're saying that Princess Margaret, he had a say in what she wore on her wedding day, but also what's fascinating in the book is you talk about Queen Victoria and the kind of micromanaging that she did as well, even to her sort of her daughter-in-law, telling her what one of her daughter-in-law saying what she should have worn on her wedding day, saying, "Oh no, this won't do. How about this?"
What a nightmare!
Bridezilla,
I mean,
Queen
what a
Victoria, the
nightmare.
bridezilla.
To have your mother-in-law be so powerful, she can say, no, you're not wearing that dress you like so much.
There's a wonderful piece in here written by you about Princess Alexandra when she married Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, later Edward VII, of course. And she was the first royal to be photographed in her wedding dress, and what a dress it was. But unfortunately for Alex, the bride, as she was known, her mother-in-law was very heavily involved in all the decisions, and her original wedding dress, made from Brussels lace, was deemed unsuitable by Queen Victoria. She was, in fact, firmly guided by Her Majesty for a new full-skirted court gown. But she got her way in the end, didn't she? After the wedding, I think she altered the dress.
Yes,
as you say.
yes,
So
she never wore it
presumably
again
wear it
as
again,
it
or
was. And I think you can see when you look at the picture of it, you can see why she wouldn't. It's a bit of a horror, really.
It's a proper kind of toilet roll kind of holder, isn't it? The kind of fluffy thing that sits on the top.
Yes, you pile, you know, it's a big skirt and you pile lace onto it, and then you pile trims onto the lace, and then you pile wax flowers onto that, and beading, and it's extraordinary.
But presumably, you know, the height of fashion at the time of their wedding day, which was in March 1863.
I don't think it was the height of fashion.
Oh, really?
No, I think it was Queen Victoria dictating very rigidly what she wore, and what she wore had to adhere to Queen Victoria's vision of what was appropriate.
That's really interesting. But they continue to kind of fascinate, don't they? The kind of royal bride gowns. And I sort of fast forward to sort of 1981 when we had, of course, Princess Diana and Charles's wedding, and that was kept so under wraps, wasn't it? The kind of the fluffy kind of sleeves, and the kind of the flounciness of it all, and very much of its time. Would you say that kind of the sort of puffy sleeves and the?
It was very much of its time. I mean, the Emmanuels were very popular designers, and they were producing these extravagant dresses. In royal terms, actually, it's not so dissimilar to what, you know, Queen Victoria wore in a way. You know, it's the big skirt, it's the sleeves, it's the neckline, and her dress came in for a lot of criticism, I think principally because it was a little bit crumpled, maybe a little bit of an under exaggeration on my part, but I think for a 19-year-old it was actually a great dress. She was very young.
Yes, she was extremely young, and how can you not crumple that thing? It was a huge meringue, wasn't it?
To have worn something rather more sophisticated, I think, and we are very harsh and judgmental.
It was very kind of fairy tale dress, but there was a fascinating insight in your book about when people saw it, of course, on the television screens, even though it had been completely secret. Within hours, there was a kind of high street version that had been knocked up, and this was the days before kind of what we would see as kind of contemporary fast fashion.
Yes.
That within hours there was a kind of 500 quid version, which at the time would have been a huge amount of money.
Yes.
In one of the stores, is that right?
It was Debenhams, wasn't it?
So that kind of element of the leading the rest, rather than reflecting necessarily the fashions of the day, that kind of definite kind of leading towards the fashions.
Well, it's the royal allure, I think, that is important, and also for, I think, you know, particularly with wedding dresses, almost more so than anything else, you do have a sense that the royals know how to do it. Most of us don't, you know, go around in great big ornate frocks most of the time. Most of us don't wear long dresses even very much. And so people do look at what the royals wear to try and get some lead.
Mhm.
And I think, it's one of the, it's not the biggest day of your life, but it's a heck of an occasion to dress for. And, people worry about it. They spend months planning it. They spend ages trying to get it right. And so I think it does it gives them a lot of ideas, and it makes people feel safe within a certain style parameter if the royals have done it. And I actually think the mother of the bride issue, actually, that is the way the royals dress most of the time when they're out and about. So they have that mother of the bride look.
Yeah, it's the coat dress, and it's the,
The
the
hat, the
matching kind of
bag, the
dress.
gloves.
Yes, exactly. And Kate's played it very safe, hasn't she? The Princess of Wales.
Mm,
I mean, she obviously knows what suits her, but she's not kind of, and she's fashionable to a point, but she's not like Meghan in that respect. There's a bit in the book where it talks about not all superheroes wear capes, which was actually a report from the Times
mm,
at the time around the Queen's funeral, when
mm.
Meghan wore this fantastic kind of black cape, which was quite at odds with what the kind of royal standard cookie
Yes.
cutter kind of coat dress was. I mean, what's your view on Kate leading fashion or following fashion, or is she more sort of going down the route of listening to other members of the royal family and dressing more appropriate to her role rather than perhaps her age? What would you say?
The first thing I think I'd want to say always is I think they have to walk a terrible tightrope. I mean, heaven forbid that
Oh no.
any of us would have to handle the kind of scrutiny that they
Mhm,
deal with. They are picked apart if they're
mhm,
too fashionable, if they're not fashionable enough, if they're a little
mhm,
bit dowdy, if it's not smart, if there's any kind of wardrobe malfunction, something doesn't sit right. The press pick up on it, and they get picked to pieces. So I think
it's often the women who go.
it's much more the women now. I think it's easier for the men to dress themselves in a safe, respectably royal way. Um,
Mhm,
but
mhm,
they, it's such a problem area for them. You can't go too short, you can't go too
mm,
long, nothing can fly off. And I don't blame them for, I would say, playing it a little bit safe. And people say, oh, they're not fashionable enough. But in a sense, the royals are never that fashionable, actually. They can't be. You can't be.
mhm,
You don't want to
mhm,
attract attention because you're looking too out there and too modish. You want, as a royal, to stand slightly
mhm,
separate. That, your clothes are your uniform, and that's the thing that's going to make you look
mhm.
different from the hoi polloi. They just have a
Mhm.
very difficult task, and I think we're too critical of them.
Absolutely. There is a way in which the fashion for the royals can be used to make a point,
Mm,
make a diplomatic point, for example, with their dressing. I remember when Kate went to Jamaica and she wore a kind of yellow
mm.
Roxanda dress, and she was later seen in a kind of green dress emulating the kind of colours of the flag. So there is this kind of soft diplomacy that goes on through their choices of what they wear, although it might not be them saying, oh, this is the most
Yes,
fashionable
they
thing. They're
are,
making a
and
point in a different way,
they
perhaps.
do use those techniques quite a lot. I think in this day and age, probably there's a tendency to downplay some of the excesses of that, which I think is a good thing. I don't think in style terms,
Mhm.
because you're going to Canada, every outfit has to be in the colour of the Canadian flag, and you have to have maple leaves plastered on you, here, there, and
Big maple
everywhere.
leaf on the front, yeah.
I think that at times with Queen Elizabeth was taken a teeny bit too far, perhaps, here and there. And I think the younger royals are toning that down a little bit, but whilst doing, what you said, paying a tribute. I mean, the green evening dress that Kate wore in Jamaica was amazing. It was absolutely stunning, but it was a green evening dress.
Mm-hmm. Yes, let's not take it let's not take it too far, sort of thing. Yes, I think well, it's not just the women, is it, that come in for this scrutiny sometimes, because the king is quite fond of quite jazzy ties, I've noticed, and he's got a little kind of dinosaur one with dinosaurs all over, and it's a kind of T-Rex tie because he's Rex, the king. There was one he wore on Easter Sunday. It had little boats on. But he did get into some kind of hot water at one of the COP conferences, where he was wearing what seemed to be a kind of Greek flag kind of emblem on his tie, and the Greek press took it to be that he was making a point about the Elgin marbles, obviously a controversial kind of marvels. There's always been that kind of conversation over where they rightly belong. And do you think that people read too much into
Generally,
those sorts
yes.
of things?
I mean, as I say, I cannot begin to imagine the pressure. And, I can imagine you or I, getting dressed and going out to something special and flinging something on and saying, yes, that looks quite nice, and I like this silk scarf. And then somebody picks up on the fact that the colours on the silk scarf are of a flag that the country, whoever it is you're visiting, is having a big row with, and people are looking for stories wherever they can find them, and I just think it's fantastically hard for them.
It is very hard, isn't it? But they do it very well, and they have people to help them with it, like you say, the flyaway. I remember the late Queen having kind of an extra shoulder pad put in, and this was all kind of revealed by her dresser, wasn't it, at the who wrote a book, The Other Side of the Coin, Angela Kelly, who said that she'd added another kind of shoulder pad on one side to sort of even the Queen out as she got older, and and naturally was sort of stooping a little bit more, and those weights within the bottom of the dress to keep it down on a windy day and things like that. So there's all these little tricks of the trade that perhaps we'd be better off borrowing if we had dresses.
Yeah, well, it's the benefit of proper couture. If you have something made to, essentially, it's like the best kind of men's tailoring. We're all lopsided. Mm-hmm. We're all, we all have breasts that are slightly different sizes and shoulders that sit differently. And good couture will balance you out. It will make you look, whatever shape or size you are, it will make you look the best that you can look. And that's why, in a sense, it's important for somebody like the Queen to wear those kind of clothes. She can feel absolutely secure, or she could, I should say. She could feel very secure going about doing her work, without having to worry about anything fussy or having to adjust things, because everything would sit just as it should. And to have your whole wardrobe fitted to you in couture is a massive undertaking. I mean, each thing will need a minimum of 3 fittings, an absolute minimum. And all that time you're standing there being pinned, the end result is fabulous, but
the work that goes into it, perhaps we don't appreciate.
It's an unenviable thing, Yes, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all have one outfit? But
they all have mannequins in their own shape and size then?
They do, but
they wouldn't have to stand there to have to be
You've still
pinned.
got to check, and people gain weight, they lose weight, they change. So a couturier could never rely on the Queen's dummy, which they had at Hardy Amis, the Queen's dummy, which was padded up or slimmed down as occasion demanded, but you couldn't rely on it. You would always have to do a fitting.
And I suppose that's why the Queen was so close to Angela Kelly, because that is quite a personal job, isn't it? Somebody who has to, it's very intimate kind of, they're seeing you in your, your undercrackers all the time. I mean, for a royal, I mean, there's something sort of slightly, you do feel for them that they have to go through that, perhaps. But yeah, like you
Yes.
say, the end result is fantastic. And tell us a bit about the kind of the robes and the finery that feature, obviously, whenever we talk about royals and fashion and what they wear. There's some excellent parts in the book and some brilliant pictures of the most recent coronation, which was pared down a little bit, wasn't it? That we didn't have all the tiaras this time around
No.
compared to 70 years ago. There were those lovely kind of leaf kind of motif headdresses.
Mm.
And what was your take on the way that was sort of styled, if you like?
It's a tricky one, because when you read in the old newspapers, there were sets of rules for the peers and the peeresses as to what they could wear. I think it was for Edward VIII's coronation, which
never was.
Didn't happen. But all the rules were laid out about how many strips of ermine you should have. So it was, I think, 2 for a baronet, 3 for a viscount, 4 for a marchesa. It's just extraordinary. I think the king has 6, and then you have the number of balls they can have on their little coronets. I mean, in terms of social hierarchy, it would be hard to beat something more visual than that, pointing out, well, yes, you're a member of the aristocracy, but you're actually quite a low member of the aristocracy. You're not terribly important. And so I think probably it's a good thing. I think, I love a little bit of flummery and finery, and I love those robes. So maybe it's a shame that the aristocracy couldn't wear some kind of a robe, but not something that highlighted every minute detail of their social differences. But I think, it, particularly in essentially that we've been living in a time of austerity, it really would have been quite wrong to have absolutely had everybody spending thousands of pounds on these extraordinary outfits that they would maybe only wear once in a lifetime.
We had far fewer aristocrats as well, didn't we, this time, of course? So that changes the dynamic anyway, that there isn't, that the ermine is not required. I had a friend who went to the coronation as a guest, and he was getting very excited about the fact that he had to wear slips, and he was saying, oh, I need slips. And, frankly, I had no idea, nor did he until he went to Savile what these slips were, but that's a sort of inner kind of waistcoat, which had a kind of an extra lining, which looked like you were wearing something underneath. But of course, that was optional because there was they weren't told what they had to wear. So it was more relaxed, more informal. Do you think we're seeing that to the royal family? We're seeing an element of, in this new reign, a kind of a new sort of informality when it comes to dressing. And
I think things are less formal by degrees than they were. I mean, you used to have court dress, which if you were going in front of the king or queen, you had to wear this sort of very rigidly prescribed court dress. So yes, we are much more relaxed, but I think certainly people do take some account of what's happening around them in terms of what is socially acceptable, when you can put on a big show and when you can't.
There's been a lot of discussion, obviously, about the Princess of Wales, who's sadly undergone, not just major surgery, but then revealed to the world that cancer had been found and she was undergoing preventative chemotherapy. And while this isn't something that you would necessarily think would fit into kind of a discussion about fashion, she is one of the people whose fashion is kind of discussed and analysed. And it was interesting to see, I think, the way that she presented herself with sort of jeans and a jumper, and there was a real sense of kind of authenticity and a humility about it. But it just struck me as completely extraordinary, because I can't remember a time that I've seen any other member of the royal family in you know, in that way. And it sort of it erodes that kind of gap, doesn't it? I think perhaps consciously so, between what any one of us would wear, you know, in the back garden, and
Yes.
what they wear.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think I think what she did also was, you know, remind everybody essentially, you know, I'm one of you. I can get sick as any of you can. She was very much emphasizing that, you know, she wasn't alone in what she was going through. And so I think probably that outfit was picked quite carefully to play down the royal aspect. We all know she's royal. We don't have to be hit over the head, you know, with a hammer every time to remind us. So I think what she did was very smart there.
And there'll be interesting to see how she comes back, I guess, and how she presents herself to the world when she's ready to do that.
Well, I think, you know, everybody, you know, Diana Spencer, Meghan Markle, Kate, they've all come from a background where they just dressed casually, as most people do. So I think often the people who marry into the royal family wear casual clothing more comfortably than the royals often do when we see them in it, because they're used to it. It's what they've done all their lives until they became royal and had to adopt this very different way of dressing.
Well, that's right with William, isn't it? We kind of go, oh, this is casual William with but his casual look is, you know, it's still kind of the shirt and the specific, the jump, you know, the little crew neck jumper and chinos and very nice trousers, shoes. We don't really see him in that, you know, that kind of dress down Friday element, do we?
No, it's a very safe casual look.
Yes. And Diana, you touched on Diana, and you can't talk about royal fashion without talking about Diana and the way that she changed, perhaps the way we see the royal family, because she was very fashionable. Well, you may disagree. I don't know. It struck me that she was very fashionable, but she didn't always play it safe. But there are those iconic dresses which, you know, when she danced with John Travolta, for example, and, you know, some of them are still doing the rounds at auctions, and they're going for sort of tens and hundreds of thousands of pounds for some of these items of what are now kind of fashion memorabilia as much as royal memorabilia. But then the next day you'd see her in jeans and trainers with a baseball cap and a kind of slogan sweatshirt.
Yes.
Do you think some of that was conscious, or was that just, you know, she was just following what she wanted to do? Because you can almost chart it, like you say, from the wedding dress age 19 to having that confidence to wear what she wanted to do, and she was going to do things her own way.
Yes, I think, I mean, she Sarah Moore wrote an article about it in the Times, and she said, you know, towards the end of her life, which of course was tragically young, she looked fabulous because she looked comfortable in her skin. She developed a way of dressing which, although it was very elegant and stylish, it looked very comfortable. It would be, you know, a simple sleeveless dress with a handbag and a pair of pumps and nice hair, not loads of jewellery. And she just looked very comfortable and easy as she went around. And by the same token, you know, the very famous image of her in Angola with the sort of blue sleeveless shirt and the short chinos, the pedal pushers, and a pair of loafers, and walking across the minefield. And she looked utterly fabulous. Mm-hmm. It was very simple, it was very her, but she'd somehow developed this very easy, simple way of dressing that suited her and suited her personality. But it did take her a long while to get there.
Yeah, and even now we have, whenever kind of Meghan or Kate step out at any kind of official event or well, perhaps not official anymore now that Meghan's left in her part, but there's always this kind of, it seems sort of slightly unfair comparison, isn't there, between what they're wearing and Diana. But she, having said that, she did seem to kind of set a pattern for how to dress, because her departure from, you know, Princess Anne, and well, who in her own way was fashionable in her own, you know, in her own time, wasn't she?
But I think some of that was because she had matured enough that she didn't feel she had to dress royal, if you like. She didn't have to follow a very particular way of dressing. And I, you know, the poor girl at 19, trying to find all these hats and coats and suits and things for the races and things for a supermarket opening, and it's an absolute minefield. How do you dress for that at 19? And it's not surprising she got things wrong sometimes, but she learned how to dress simply. That came with time. But yes, certainly towards the end, when she wasn't trying to be royal, she just was a princess. She got it absolutely right.
Yeah. And in future, do you think we'll see, you know, we've got Prince George, Princess Charlotte, Prince Louis coming up. Anytime there's a picture of them released, you know, those outfits, they go, you know, they go out of stock really quickly. And I think even now that Princess of Wales, who's obviously conscious that her children aren't these kind of clothes horses, or even to be seen as such, has consciously kind of picked old jumpers that aren't for sale anymore, or they've been kind of from something that she's had for a few years. So she's obviously trying to sort of step away from that so that they don't come under that scrutiny, which I think is quite interesting. But they're quite kind of, they focus on kind of British designers and quite safe.
Yes, and how do you dress a 5-year-old for a coronation? You know, people often complain that they look a bit like stuffed shirts. They look like children out of the 1950s. But I don't know how you dress a child to be royal.
I don't know how you dress a child, full stop. Having a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old, you know, they wear, in my case, it's hard enough to get socks on them, let alone kind of put them in a, so I think hats off to them if they can make them look like, you know, with their hair perfect.
Yeah, they have very firm views very quickly.
They do. This is such a fabulous book, and it's not just the wonderful images, it's the story of the people. It's a story of this family through the years, which I think is fantastic. It's all the people who have shaped our history, right from Queen Victoria, and as we discussed her bridezilla ways, right through to the present day, through to the Princess of Wales. So thank you for that, because it's very interesting, and we can continue to see perhaps, you know, where it goes from here. We've seen the Duchess of Sussex recently wearing a kind of what looked to be a kind of a black ball gown as part of a kind of promo teaser for her new business venture. So perhaps there will be Hollywood glamour to come from the Sussexes and their children in the future as well.
It'll be interesting to see.
Will, won't it? Thank you so much for your time, Jane.
That's an absolute pleasure.
You've been listening to Royal Confidential on Times Radio. You can find my work in The Times or listen to Times Radio for royal updates. But for now, goodbye.